Morning. Good evening. Today's shiur is sponsored by Susan Kahn. It's to commemorate the second yahrzeit of Tzvi, their son Tzvi Olav Shalom, Tzvi Dov Shmuel ben Rabbi Yaakov. So we obviously remember Tzvi, and may the words of Torah we study here tonight be a schus, a merit for the very special neshama of Tzvi Dov Shmuel. So we do thank you very much. Now, we're going to go ahead and start off with what I called musagim. In other words, what we're going to go ahead is we're going to review a few pieces of information that I believe will be quite beneficial for what we'll be studying here tonight. Okay, so therefore you're going to have to, as they say in Yiddish, hold cup. You're going to have to go ahead and hold the head because this is an in-depth shiur. It's not light, but Torah it is, and I think perhaps there are going to be some elements that are going to be beneficial to all. So what you have here on the screen in front of you are a few names and a few concepts. The first thing you find on the list is Yam Shel Shlomo. The Yam Shel Shlomo does not refer to the pool that was made by King Solomon, but rather it is a halachic work on the Talmud by Rab Shlomo Luria of the 16th century. Now, Rab Shlomo Luria, according to contemporaries of that period of time, actually considered him the Gadol Hador, the greatest rabbinic authority for European communities of the 16th century. Rab Shlomo Luria. Now remember, please remember, that's piece of information number one. Remember Rab Shlomo Luria, sometimes he's going to be referred to as Rashal. Number two on the list is a responsa of an authority who died in the beginning of the 18th century, Rabbi Chaim Yair Bachrach. Now, his work was popular, but not everyone had access to his work. His responsa was known as Chavot Yair. Chavot Yair. Okay? So far, two things you have to be mindful of before we enter into our studies. Number three, Shulchan Aruch was printed in the second half of the 16th century, and many great commentators shared their insights and their Torah and their explanations to the Shulchan Aruch, and we've been studying it since. However, the vast majority of scholars had information that appeared in responsa literature. Responsa literature meaning a rabbi in a small shtetl has a shaila, has a question. So what he would do is he would pen his question, send it to a great rabbi in some other town, perhaps in Vilna, perhaps in Kovna, perhaps in Bialystok, perhaps in Königsberg, and the response would be eventually collected by either the author himself of the response or his disciples in some cases. And we have the She'elot v'Tshuvot literature, the literature of responsa. And we are familiar with many She'elot v'Tshuvot. Most times when you hear people quoting, for example, Reb Moshe Feinstein, they are quoting from the Igrot Moshe, from his responsa work. Now, the problem was that by early 19th century, there's a tremendous amount of halachic information that does not appear in the Shulchan Aruch or on the commentators on the Shulchan Aruch. And the halachic authority needs to know what these rabbis said. So there was a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Avraham Tzvi Eisenstadt, so Rabbi Eisenstadt. At a very young age, at age 18, he begins the process of collecting from 180 she'elot v'tshuvot, 180 different responses. not 180 responses, 180 works that has been labeled as She'elot v'Tshuvot, and he gives us a summary of what that halachic authority says, and then he mentions it at the appropriate location in Shulchan Aruch. So therefore, his work, Pitchei Tshuva, or Pischei Tshuva, became a classic, and it is not possible to study the laws of kashrut in Yoreh De'ah. It is not possible to be familiar with the laws that relate to pots and pans, milchiks and fleishiks, right? Milk that spills into a fleishik pot, for example. You cannot study just with the work of the Shulchan Aruch and the commentators of the Shulchan Aruch. It is a must to turn to Pitchei Tshuva as well. So that's piece of information number 3 you need to know. Number 4, by the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, another rabbi decides to collect information from responsa and to share in more length than Pitchei Tshuva. And this was Reb Tzvi Yair Shapira from Munkach. We're familiar with Munkach Chassidim. The son of this rabbi completed the work of his father of Darchei Tshuva, the Rebbe of Munkach, which Mark Lane remembers him. So that is another work called Darchei Tshuva. Okay, so there is Pitchei Tshuva, Darchei Tshuva. At times, Darchei Tshuva quotes from Pitchei Tshuva. Keep that information in mind. Now, there's going to be a problem, because at times, when you are collecting information from 180 different works, and you are only sharing the main concept, right? You are distilling the information. At times, the way it is conveyed may not address the precise issue as it appears in the original. So therefore, any Torah scholar knows that it is extremely important to turn to the original source and not just rely on second-hand material. Okay, keep that in mind. The next 3 on our Musagim page are responsa from the 20th century. The first one is from a rabbi who was in Manchester, moved to Israel, Rabbi Weiss, the Minchat Yitzchak. Number 2 is from Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, which you hear of often, Minchat Shlomo. The third one is from Rab Avadia Yosef, She'elot v'Tshuvot Yabia Omer. So please keep that in mind. So as we study and introduce again these names, you at least will be a little bit familiar with them. Now, the third thing we're going to address relates to concepts. One of them is Yad Soledet Bo. What does that mean? Literally, it means that the hand recoils if something is hot, and you're not going to hold it, but you're going to let go of it because it's too hot, or you're going to pull your hand back. That is called in halachic literature Yad Soledet Bo. It is a very important level of heat, because in kashrut we all know that there's a difference between that which was absorbed cold or hot. What is the cutoff? So in Talmudic literature, the cutoff is called Yad Soledet Bo. The hand pulls back. So therefore, if, for example, they are creating an ice cream syrup at a facility, and it's produced on equipment that in the past was used for non-kosher. If it is under Yad Soledet Bo, as long as the equipment is clean, there's no issue of koshering. If it is more than Yad Soledet Bo, it needs koshering. Yad Soledet Bo. Piece of information number 2 from our Musagim is Eino Ben Yomo, something that is not of that day. As you know, quite often when you have questions on kashrut, question number 2, I would say, would always be, was it used in the past 24 hours? If it was not used in the past 24 hours, it is called Eino. It is not Ben Yomo. It is not was not used on that day, and therefore in many situations that could make the material or the substance permissible. The next piece of information that you need in our Musagim is Kli Rishon. Kli Rishon means when I go ahead and heat water or soup on the fire in a pot, is called kli rishon. It is absorbed on a high level, and therefore it creates more halachic issues than after the liquid is transferred into a cup that is known as a kli sheni. So that's the information that you need. And now we could start our discussion, and this is a study of Torah, and it's in memory, as mentioned earlier, of Tzvi Dov Shmuel ben Rabbi Yaakov. The study tonight is a memory of Tzvi Khan, whose yortzeit is next week on the 18th of Sivan, which is on Wednesday. The Neshama should have an aliyah. We thank our sponsors, and let's start our study of Torah. Our first source appears in the Talmud, Tractate Shabbat, and you see it here. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Okay, so we're sharing now in the name, it says Rav Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel. Echad shemen ve'echad maim, and it makes no difference if we're talking about oil or water. If you want to know what the cutoff temperature is, right, regarding Shabbat, in other words, I on Shabbat am not going to heat up my water and make it hot. That's considered cooking. What is the temperature of cooking? So we are told if it yad soledet bo, if I take water and I place it on a location where it could reach at some point a temperature that I will withdraw my hand from it, asur, that is prohibited on Shabbat, that's cooking. On the other hand, the Talmud tells us, ein yad soledet bo, if on the other hand my hand does not recoil, it does not pull back, mutar. So therefore on Shabbat, for example, if I put out of my refrigerator, right, some juice, and I want to heat it up for a child who doesn't like it cold, so I put it on top of my hot water pump because I know at that location it's not yad soledet bo. Now the Talmud wants to know, how do you determine what is considered yad soledet and what not? Vehei chidami yad soledet bo. Meaning, what exactly is that temperature? They did not have thermometers at that time. So therefore, they present for us a very crude way of assessing it, which I sure hope the Talmudic scholars did not expect us to use that system. The Talmud tells us in the name of Rechava, Kol shekreso shel tinok nechvet. If it is hot enough that it will scald the baby's stomach, that is considered yad soledet. Fine, maybe the rabbis were more familiar with such temperature. Maybe they would bathe their babies and would know. I don't know exactly, but due to the fact that the Talmud does not give us a precise assessment, and you cannot tell me that you're going to rely on your hand touching it to determine if it's yad soledet or not, because some hands are more sensitive than others. So this is a halachic issue that authorities have been struggling with. How do you determine yad soledet? It is important for the laws of Shabbat. It is extremely important for the laws of kashrut, right? People often wash by mistake a fleishik dish in a milchik sink. And the question is going to be asked, how hot was the water? You are trying to figure out, was it yes yad soledet bo? Was it not yad soledet bo? You need to know the temperature. So therefore, authorities have been attempting throughout, I would say, the modern era to figure out a way, right, to figure out somehow the proper temperature to assess it. And different opinions have been presented. So we're going to start off with what Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach tells us. Comes Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, a great 20th century authority. I had the opportunity one time to ask him a question on a different issue. And Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is trying to figure out what temperature is it. Again, now that we have the ability at home to figure out, to measure with precision the temperature of water, of any liquid or any substance, People want to know. So Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach declares with confidence that anything less than 45 degrees Celsius, which is 113 Fahrenheit, is not Yad Soledet bo. Meaning, it could be perhaps that even 120 Fahrenheit is not Yad Soledet bo, but for sure, up to 113 is not a question. In other words, what Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is telling us that with confidence, if on the top of my hot water pump, I know that the temperature there is only 112 degrees Fahrenheit or 44 Celsius, I could heat things up on Shabbat there. If I know for a fact that the water coming out of my spigot, my spout was 112 degrees Fahrenheit, and I washed something fleishiks in the milk sink, worry not. How did he determine that? So Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is going to present, number one, a source. And the source is going to be a statement in the Talmud. One second. The statement in the Talmud that he's going to share appears in Tractate Shabbat, where we are told, Bet Hashchita Sonen. Bet Hashchita Sonen. What does that mean exactly? So it works as follows. The Talmud there in Tractate Chulin is talking about shchita and knives, and it mentions there that you don't have to concern yourself that when you shecht an animal, and then you find out it wasn't kosher, you don't have to be concerned about the blood, or in all cases you shecht an animal, worry not that the blood of that comes out of the neck will contaminate the status of the knife, because the animal's neck, as it is being shechted, does not reach the temperature of Yad Soledet. It is under Yad Soledet, and therefore it's called sonen, lukewarm. So Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach realized that he has here an opportunity to figure out a temperature that with great confidence he could declare is not Yad Soledet bo. Because Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach tells us that he figured out that you should know that when it comes to the temperature of a duck, midat hachom shel barvaz, the temperature of a duck, is karov le-45 malot. Blood. It appears that ducks have warm blood, and it reaches 45 degrees Celsius. And the duck is a kosher species. So when you shech the duck, the Talmud tells us, worry not, when it comes to any kosher species, the temperature of the blood that is by the neck is not considered Yad Soledet. So therefore, says Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, im ken, therefore, muchach, it is proven, vadai, without a question, the ad shi'ur, that until you reach the measurement of 45 malot Celsius, until you reach 45 Celsius, ein lachush, there's no concern, klal de shema hayat soledet bo. There's no question in Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's mind, and by the way, this is halacha with confidence, and this is what we follow. Worry not if it's 45 degrees or 113, it is not considered hot halachically. This is what is followed. And fine, if we would only be interested now in practical halacha, we can end it here. However, I remember hearing, this goes back many years ago, probably around 25 years ago, that there is an opinion, a minority opinion that's rejected, but it was a problematic opinion. What was the opinion? So I remember being told that there's an opinion that anything that is warmer than the temperature of human spit is considered perhaps Yad Soledet. In other words, the liquid that you will find in the human mouth is the same temperature of the body, which is around 37 degrees Celsius. So we're being told that there was a minority opinion. This is what we were told, that there was a minority opinion that believed that anything more than that, you have to be concerned that perhaps it's Yad Soledet. This is not logical. This appears to be problematic, but nevertheless, it was quoted. And what we're going to do today, what we're going to study here today, is we're going to go a little bit through the history of responsa and those who quote responsa, and realize how at times, unfortunately, mistakes occur. This one is one that did not affect us halachically, but nevertheless, it is to remind us you must look at primary sources. Never rely, and this is what we're taught in yeshiva, never rely on someone who quotes a primary source, because perhaps it was not quoted with precision. So that's our journey today. And our journey today is going to start off with the Darchei Tshuva quoting the Pischei Tshuva. So you remember who they were. They are both authorities that went through the plethora of responsa. And both of them are going to quote an authority, and we're going to realize that, unfortunately, a mistake was made throughout this journey. So let's start off with the Darchei Tshuva from the Munkatcher Rebbe, and he shares with us the following. And if you realize, I was not able to put it in the same font that is used in the rest of the printout, because this does not appear on my Bar Ilan CD. So let's study this and follow. Here we go. Ra'iti tells us the Darchei Tshuva, I saw. Bepet taf shin, in the Pitchei Tshuva. Okay, so he's quoting something that he saw in the earlier source. Shehevi, he tells us where that he brought. Mitshuvot, from the responsa of Chavot Yair. So let's halt cup here. It's Darchei Tshuva quoting Pischei Tshuva, who is quoting from responsa Chavot Yair, an authority of the late 17th, early 18th century. And he quotes that Chavot Yair in Siman Kuf Aleph, please remember that says the following: Kol shehu cham yoter mi poshrin, anything that is warmer than lukewarm. And what is considered poshrim? Shehu yoter mechamimut harok, anything that is warmer than the temperature of spit, of saliva, I should say, perhaps better. Yesh lehachmir mesafek. You gotta be machmir, you gotta be careful. Shema perhaps have bechlal yad soledet. This is the source for a statement which is problematic because it's not logical, but at least we know the source. Where do we get this idea that anything warmer than saliva is considered hot? It is from Darchei Tshuva quoting Pischei Tshuva, quoting Chavot Yair in Siman Kuf Aleph. Now, I'll tell you why this became a problem, because later great authorities of the 20th century, from the greatest authorities, they quote this. For example, Minchat Yitzchak, the rabbi in Manchester, he quotes Chavot Yair from Kuf Aleph, De becham yoter mechamimut harok, have bechlal safek yad soledet bo. So again, he quotes Rabbi Minchat Yitzchak, and remember, he quotes from Chavot Yair 101, Kuf Aleph 101. So this is a problem. He rejects it, but nevertheless he quotes it. And many who reject it, they say this makes no sense. I can't believe a great rabbi like Rabbi Bachrach, the Chavot Yair, how can he say such a thing? But nevertheless, it's quoted. And it goes even, believe it or not, even the great Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, right? Even the great Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he too appears to be quoting it here. He writes, Huva bepitchet tshuva, he quotes the pitchet tshuva. Excuse me, sorry there. From Shuvot Chavot Yair, it's quoted from the response of Chavot Yair, Kuv Dalet. Now here already is something interesting. While up until now, we were told that it appears in the Chavot Yair 101, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach notes that it's actually 104. So keep that information in mind. But he too says, Kol shucham yoter mi poshrin, anything that is warming is warmer than saliva, yesh lahachmir shema v'chliat soledet bo. And he too is surprised. So this is a problem. This is a problem. And I never really addressed it, to be honest, with in detail, meaning I knew that there was such an opinion. I never put too much thought into it because it's not practical halacha. However, a couple weeks ago, I decided to investigate more. And the reason is my oldest, Uzi, is studying Yoredeya. And it appears that he went through the sources and he sent me an email and he said, I see some great rabbis claiming that Chavot Yair is of the opinion that anything anything warmer than the temperature of saliva is considered Yad Soledet bo. And Uzi says to me, I read Chavot Yair, and I don't agree with them. I don't think he's saying that. So I didn't have the time. I looked through the Chavot Yair fast, and I communicated with Uzi. Then eventually, when I studied it more carefully, I realized that, Baruch Hashem, my son is 100% right. And it appears that these great figures that we just quoted simply did not see Chavot Yair inside. In other words, they relied on Darchei Tshuva, who quotes Pischei Tshuva, who quotes Chavot Yair, but did not look inside. And the reason I am confident that that's the case, because as you remember, the Darchei Tshuva and the Minchas Yitzchak, when they quote Chavot Yair, they say, look at Responsa 101. Responsa 101 is how it appears in Pischei Tshuva. That's a printer's error. Because actually, I looked in the Chavot Yair, it's in 104. So that is a clear indication that they made the mistake because they did not get Chavot Yair from its original source, but they relied on others who quote it. So the question is, what does Chavot Yair actually say? So that is what I want to study with you tonight, which actually relates to some halachic issues. But to appreciate this great rabbinic figure, we're going to have to start off. And again, Chavot Yair dies in the year 1702. 1702, a great rabbinic figure as mentioned. And to appreciate him, we're going to have to start a little bit earlier with Rab Shlomo Luria, the great 16th century authority. And we're going to quote here from Yam Shel Shlomo, his work on Talmud, where he is sharing with us a stringency. And listen to the stringency of Rab Shlomo Luria. Rab Shlomo Luria is going to tell us that you should know, although we are always told that anything that is less than Yad Soledet, anything that is cooler than a temperature, than the hand would pull back, is not considered hot. There is a stringency that originates in the Jerusalem Talmud, that if you have a pot and it's on the fire, even if it did not reach Yad Soledet, you should be concerned that perhaps it absorbed flavor. In other words, the situation would be as follows. If, let's say, I cook some milk in a milchik pot on the fire, okay? I shut it off. People used to pasteurize their milk. Let's say I pasteurize the milk at home, and the milk reached 168, 172 Fahrenheit, and then I let it cool down. It cooled down to 110. So clearly it's not Yad Soledet. When it was 110, I decided to remove the fat, right, the butter from the top of the milk, but I grabbed by mistake a fleishik spoon. I removed the fat, and oy vey, here I have a shaila, because it's a fleishik spoon and I am removing milk. What do I do? So halachically, we would follow, or what we would expect would be to be told that since it is under Yad Soledet, since it is less than 113, the milk is fine and the spoon is fine, just rinse it off. But now we have a stringency that if you have a kli rishon, a vessel that was on the fire, even though it is under Yad Soledet, as long as it is still cham, as long as it is still hot, even if it's not Yad Soledet bo, we have to be concerned and consider the fleshik spoon as one that absorbed milchiks, and consider the milk as one that absorbed from the fleshik spoon. And this is based on a Jerusalem Talmud. So this is known in halachic literature as the stringency of Maharshal. And therefore Maharshal tells us here that you should know, mistafina, I am afraid. This is used by halachic poskim at times when they are afraid to be lenient. They say, I'm afraid lehakel. I cannot be lenient with a kli rishon, a vessel, she'omed ala esh, that is actually on the fire. Kol zman she'ucham, as long as it is still hot. Afilu ein hayad soledet bo, even if it's not so hot that the hand would pull back, nevertheless he's of the opinion that you have to concern yourself that there's transfer of flavor and absorption. Why? The rabbis were more strict when they are dealing with the kli rishon. And since it's a kli rishon, it is the pot on the fire, even after it cools down from Yad Soledet bo, since it is still cham, you have to be concerned. So this is the great Maharshal, as mentioned, the Gadol Ador of the 16th century, and therefore it was taken into consideration by later halachic authorities. And now it is time to study a later halachic authority. And this later halachic authority is She'elot v'Tshuvot Chavot Yair. So here we are. We're going to study Chavot Yair 104. Okay? We're going to see what he talks about. And then perhaps we'll figure out why a mistake was made by these authorities, because they did not see the Chavot Yair, but rather they saw others quoting Chavot Yair. So here's the story. And by the way, this is typical to responsa. Responsa in many ways is interesting, because you're not just learning the halacha, you're learning a little bit of history, and you're learning about stories. In this case, there's no history, but at least you could revisit a kitchen of the late 17th century, and you can actually feel you are there by reading the question that was sent to this great rabbi, Maaseh Shahaya, something that actually occurred. The story is a she'ela. You see where we're starting here? She'ela in Chavot Yair. Isha, a woman, hirticha chalav. She warmed up her milk. Baboker, in the morning of Yom Bet, on a Monday morning, a woman heats up her milk, or more than just heats it up, roteach. It reaches a boiling point. So what we've learned is that perhaps they used to pasteurize milk even then, perhaps, or perhaps it was some kind of recipe. And it was done bikdera shel cheres. It was done in an earthenware vessel. Okay, late 17th century, they're using earthenware vessels. Now, vehotira miktsata bikdera. She left a little bit of milk in the pot. Le'ochlo batzehorayin kar. It seems to be that in the afternoon it heated up, and she wanted some room temperature milk, so she left a little bit of milk. It was heated in the morning. It remained and cooled down from morning into afternoon. In the afternoon, it was cool. And then after mid-afternoon, she drinks her lukewarm milk. She washed out her pot. She was in balabosta. Okay, people wash dishes. What we learned as well in the late 17th century, people were washing their dishes and not leaving it overnight. Now, why is there a halachic question? Uba boker sheni, the next morning, this is already a Tuesday, okay? Nitchalfa lahakdera, she's made a mistake. She got confused. And instead of taking her fleshik pot, she took this milchik pot. Velakcha hakdera hanizgeret leel. she takes the pot, the one that we just mentioned, the milchik pot, samuch lechatzi hayom, right around midday, okay, near midday. And what did she cook? V'shafta bo basar ubishla bo. Gemachta fleishik meal. Okay? So you hear the question. 24 hours ago, there was milk in the pot. Now there's fleish. The rule is that if within 24 hours you cook fleishik in a pot that had milchiks within 24 hours, your fleishiks, your meat, is not kosher. Okay? However, if the milk 24 hours ago was cold, not yet soledet, but it should be fine. Okay? So the question is, what's the status? What the rabbi is being asked here is, number one, what's the status of the meat? Number two, what's the status of the pot? So he gives us his psak, and this, by the way, is not the whole tshuva. I only quoted sections that relate to us. And he tells us, vehoreti. My psak was, shehakdera asura. Bad news. The pot is not kosher. The pot is not kosher. Why? Because even if you had 24 hours between milk and meat, the pot itself cannot be used not for meat and not for milk, because it was a pot that was used for both. On the other hand, habasar mutar, the meat is fine. Now, even though on noon, when she put the meat in on Tuesday, 24 hours earlier, it had milk. Nevertheless, he tells us that the meat is okay. Me'achar shehakdera eino ben yomo. This pot was not used in the past 24 hours for tashmish cham, for hot milk. The milk cooled down by then. Ve'afal pi, and he tells us, even though she'akati, after all, hu ben yomo, it is within the 24 hours from when the lukewarm room temperature milk was removed, mizman shehurak mimeno hachalav, even though the milk was in the pot on Monday until 3 p.m., right? And now noon, it is only 21 hours afterwards. Says Rabbi Yair Bachrach, kvar haya mikamei hachitzonen. It was cool already by then. Now, he is going to share with us that there would be a reason, or would be a reason to perhaps be machmir. And that's how responsa works. Even though he tells us it's permissible, he shares with us perhaps there would be a different way to look at it. And therefore he adds, ve'afal pe, even though shehayat sad, there was a side and a svara thought lomar, perhaps, that hoil, since shenishar chalav zu biktera, this milk that was in the pot from noon to 3 p.m., shenitbashla bo, and it was cooked in this pot, right? Vitchila livloa bibishul. In other words, let's analyze it. This milk that was in there from noon to 2 or 3, whatever the time was, it wasn't just lukewarm milk that was placed into a pot. This was room temperature milk that originated as hot milk. And one would think that perhaps it continues absorbing into the pot even when it cools down. So therefore, one would think that perhaps lachen bolea, it absorbs. Veholech, it continues being absorbed into the pot. Afilu achar shenitztanen, perhaps since absorption was intense in the morning, right? Monday morning, when the milk was heated, right, and boiled in this pot. That was intense absorption. So perhaps absorption continues even after it cools, even into the afternoon, and that would create a problem for the meat on Tuesday. Bitzarich, perhaps me'et le'et, 24 hours. That's the achar shehurak mitocho. Perhaps be more machmer. And now he's going to add, why would one think that perhaps you should be machmer? Because let's remember that Rabbi Shlomo Luria, Yam Shel Shlomo, the great rabbinic authority, Mistapek, remember he has a doubt, Bekli Rishon. He has a doubt and he is concerned that when it is the pot that was on the fire, you should be more machmir, based on the Jerusalem Talmud. Le'esor, to prohibit, afal pi she'ein hayat soledet bo. Remember what Maharshal Rab Shlomo Luria tells us? That if you have a pot on the fire, even after it is under Yad Soledet, perhaps there's absorption, because it is by a fire. So he tells us you should know that as long as it is by the esh, it should be a problem. But he tells us the following, that the concern would be that if the 24 hours that began on Monday actually start from the afternoon, that would be a problem. But he tells us the following, and this is to the underlined area, that when does Maharshal say that liquid on a fire could absorb, even if it is less than Yad Soledet? That is only if it is more than posher. That is only if it is more than the temperature of saliva. But if it cooled down and it is less than the temperature of saliva, worry not. And that's what he tells us. If indeed, right, Reb Shlomo Luria tells us that a person should be concerned that if you have a pot on the fire, it absorbs, right? Remember my milk with the spoon that I took a fleischig spoon? So I boiled my milk. I let it cool down for an hour. I take my spoon. I remove the fat. Tells me Reb Shlomo Luria, be careful. Your fleischig spoon transferred flavor. And I say to Reb Shlomo Luria, but it was not Yad Soledet. Reb Shlomo Luria says, I'm sorry. I am of the opinion that even if it is cham, not Yad Soledet, even if it's just hot, perhaps there's a transfer of flavor from milk to spoon. Well, tells us Chavot Yair, that concern is only if it is cham. How do you define cham? Anything that is more than the temperature of saliva is cham. Yoter miposher sheshiro bechamimut harok. Only then there is a concern. Okay? On the other hand, tells us Chavot Yair that in my scenario with this woman, Nidon Didan, Nidon, you see the Nun Dalet, and the Nun Dalet, Nidon Didan, in our scenario, meaning with my woman and the pot, Monday, milk, Tuesday, flesh, Shekvar Kala Me'et Le'et Achar Sinun, the 24 hours, right? The 24 hours that began on Monday, by the time they pass, it already was cooled down. In other words, when the woman starts cooking on Tuesday, the meat at noon, at that time, Monday, it already cooled down. It was cooler than rook. It was cooler than saliva. So therefore, in such a case, it's not an issue. Okay, Vadai, there's no doubt in his mind, it is what's called a noten tam nivgam. Noten tam nivgam is a terminology that's used in halachic literature for any situation where it is after 24 hours. In other words, when I cook my fleischik in a milchik pot and it was not used for 24 hours, I consider any flavor as damaged and not effective. So that's what she's telling us here, that in our scenario, when she put the fleischiks in on Tuesday noon, it was already after the 24 hours from Monday's milk that was hot, and therefore he said it's permissible. That's the end of what Rav Yair Bachrach tells us. What he does say is that there is a stringency, that if you are in a kli rishon, that if you are that if you're dealing with a pot, and it is on the fire, okay, and it didn't cool down more than the temperature of saliva, in such a case, you should be machmer and a kli rishon. That's all he says. Now, if you do not have this whole response, or if you read it fast and don't analyze it carefully, you can misunderstand this line here as saying that anything that is more than chamimut harok is yad soledet. That's a wrong reading. But nevertheless, look at the wording. Anything more chamimut harok nireh le'esor. If I can take it out of context, or if I don't read the response carefully, I could make the mistake and understand from those few words that anything more than the temperature of rock, of saliva, is yad soledet bo. And that was the mistake. It appears that it works as follows. That Pischei Tshuva quotes it, right, and is unclear. Darchei Tshuva misunderstands it because he never saw it inside, and I know he didn't see it inside because he claims that's in 101 when it's really a response of 104. And therefore, once Darchei Tshuva made that mistake and understood it to mean that anything more than the temperature of saliva is Yad Soledet, some halakha authorities quoted it and struggled with it. Okay, so this is what was pointed out to me. And afterwards, I realized that great authorities of the past already noticed that it's a misunderstanding. I quote here and I end off with Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. And Ovadia Yosef deals with the great authorities who struggle with their understanding of Chavot Yair. How can Chavot Yair say that anything more than the temperature of saliva is Yad Soledet? And they struggle and they don't understand. And Rabbi Ovadia Yosef says, I don't understand why they are struggling with it. Vani shamati velo avin, mai kushya lei. In other words, why are they asking this question? Shalu advarim mevuarim bechavot yair sham. If you read it carefully, you realize shelo katav leachmir bezeh. He never ever said to be machmir, that anything more than the temperature of saliva is considered yad soledet. All he said is, according to the Jerusalem Talmud quoted by Marshal, that you should be machmir. Okay? So therefore he notes that the Darchei Tshuva is wrong century. Leita, lahai milta bechavot yair sham. The concept and his understanding of the Chavot Yair is simply not true. And it's a mistake and a misreading. So it was fascinating for me to see that Rabbi Ovadia Yosef mentioned it when my son Uzi mentioned. He felt that if no one else says like him, he must be wrong. So he was satisfied to see that Rabbi Ovadia Yosef also agrees with his reading of it. So that's a little bit of what we have in this, I would say, untraditional, a little bit in-depth analysis of a halachic issue. And hopefully we benefited at least a little bit of the history here. And at the same time, I hope we developed a little bit of the knowledge of the history of halachic literature, the history of responsa, and more important than anything else, not relying on anyone, but rather look at sources to determine halacha and don't rely on hearsay. That's perhaps something we can learn from. Now, let's see what questions we have here. So Liz and Josh are asking, perhaps the scenario took place in the summer months when the outdoor temperature and therefore the indoor temperature was higher than 37, this would have been problematic. Good, interesting. It could have been that the temperature indoor was more than 37. That is correct. From reading Chavot Yair himself, it appears that it cooled down, because in a section I didn't quote, he does say that the woman wanted to drink something cooler. So my assessment is that it was under 37, but that's an interesting, this is a summertime question. Maybe after a hot day, you had this question. So we thank you. I'm going to do two things. Number one, I'm going to end the recording.